Hello and welcome to my course, Microsoft Azure Functions, Developing Serverless Solutions. I'm your instructor, Trevoir Williams, and I've been a software engineer, lecturer, and cloud practitioner for the past decade. In this course, we're going to be focusing on Azure Functions and how they work. We look at how to create them, test them, deploy them. We look at the different function trigger types and how we can make them interact with external services also provisioned by Azure and otherwise. Azure Functions is one of the quickest and easiest ways to get your code running in Azure while maintaining a cost-effective and serverless model. Now, in a nutshell, Microsoft Azure is Microsoft's flagship cloud platform. So you can easily get to the Azure website by going to azure.microsoft.com. And well, I'm viewing it in English US, but based on your region, you may have a version of the site that is more localized to you. And what they're presenting to you at the get-go is the ability to start a free trial. So you can try for free and they give you up to $200 worth of credit. So most of what we're going to be doing in this course is actually going to cost money. If you don't already have an Azure account, you can always go ahead and sign up for the free account and you'll get 12 months worth of certain services for free and up to $200 to be used on other services. You can look at the different free services that you'll get when you sign up. So you can do a pay as you go. That is the general offer when you pay for what you use, pretty much, right? But then upfront, you're going to get the free products, Cosmos DB, the app service, Azure Function. So we're going to be using actually these free services. So you probably won't even have to use your credit much. And you'll see that there are a bunch of things that you get once again. So you can always explore that. Right now, what I'm interested in doing is getting started for free. So I'm just going to walk you through that quickly. Now, once you click start free, you're going to see that you get the popular services. They're just reiterating what you will get, and you'll only have the $200 credit for 30 days. So you can use it up as much as you want, but then you can always add your credit card and then just pay as you use. So we can just click start free and you can sign in with your existing live account, anything at Hotmail or at Live or at Outlook.com, or you can just use your GitHub account. So in my situation, I'm just going to use my GitHub account, which incidentally is a Gmail account. And in the next step, you may be required to verify your account. So you may see a screen looking like mine or not, but go ahead and verify your account. And then you may be required also to provide your credit card information upfront, right? Of course, it's all free until you tell them you want to move over to pay as you go pricing. So you don't have to worry about getting charged outside of maybe an authorization charge just to make sure it's okay. But you may or may not have to go through these steps because I've had the experience where I didn't have to go through these steps. All right, so let's get right into understanding Azure Functions. Now, at this point, I'm making a few assumptions. One, that you already have an active Microsoft Azure account, and that two, you do have your credit card set up or you have the free credits available, as some of the activities for the duration of this course will cost some money. But we're not really at the money making part yet or the money spending part yet. We're just looking at the fundamental concepts. So I'm already logged into my Azure account. You can get to the Azure portal by going to portal.azure.com and log in with that account that you had used to create your account. And then you'll see a dashboard. It may or may not look like mine. I actually put some time and effort into customizing this one. You see here I have some resources that were deployed from another course. And you will see, you will have the ability to customize this. You can always go to new dashboard, blank dashboard, or you can just edit this one and you can shift tiles all around and customize them as you wish. Now, we are going to jump over to the functions app, or at least the service listing, and create a function app. So a function app is really an app service. So you would have seen the keyword serverless being advertised when you see Azure Functions. It is serverless because there's no physical server involved. It's a service that is being offered that allows us to host functions on. So I can actually just go to all services here, and then I can filter and say function. And then from here, I will see that I can create a function app. So when I do that, I can click create function app. And to proceed, I'm going to go through a wizard. So firstly, what is your subscription? You have different subscriptions. You're probably on the trial. You're probably on pay-as-you-go dev/test like I am. You're probably on a special one for your company or for your organization, whatever it is, you choose the one that you're going to be using. I only have one. You would want to create a new resource group. So you can go ahead and hit create new, and I'll say function app dash rg. So function dash app dash rg. Click OK. What do we want this function app name to be? I'm going to name it after the course, which is Azure Functions Fundamentals. Now, when you're doing that, as you can see, it's actually going to be a public facing address. So what you can do to make it more customized in case that's not available, you can also put dash and your initials or your name or a part of your name just to make it a bit more unique, right? So that is going to be public a publicly accessible URL that will allow us to browse to the functions that will be deployed or access the functions that are deployed in the central space from anywhere in the world. I'm sure we all know how URLs work right now, right? So next we want to say publish. Do we want code or Docker container for now? I'm going to go with code. What runtime stack do we want? Now, Azure Functions support many different languages. We see it has support for the .NET framework or platform. We can use Node.js, Python, Java, PowerShell, custom, and there are other languages being added very regularly. For this course, however, we're going to be focusing on .NET. So I will choose that. Then we choose the version. .NET 6 is the latest and the greatest. So we will proceed with that. At the time you're doing this course, they may have a later version. You can feel free to use that also. If you're not up to .NET 6, you can also choose .NET Core 3.1. Might be necessary if you don't have Visual Studio 2022 or higher at the time you're doing this course. So that's fine, but I will be showing with .NET 6. And then your region would be the data center closest to your geographical location. So if you're in Australia, you want to choose the one in Australia that's closest to you. I'm in the Caribbean, so the best one for me is usually East US, and I'll choose East US 2 as that is a newer data center to East US. So after doing all of that, we can just click through and see the other potential settings. So we can set up a storage account because we have to create a link to a storage account for blobs and queues and table storage, any form of interaction with those. We can choose an operating system. I'll leave this as Windows. We can also choose a plan type. Now the plan type is going to directly affect the costing and how the resources are spooled to support your functions app. So by clicking learn more, you can browse to the documentation. So the consumption plan will scale automatically and you only pay for compute resources when your functions are running. Now the downside to this is that they will actually turn off or deallocate the resources after a period of inactivity, and then when you need them again they will spool them up, but this may take time. So it's like it's not really always on, but then it will kind of tone down so that it saves you money in the long run. However, if it's something that you always need, then this might not necessarily be the best plan for you, right? Now the premium plan automatically scales based on demand, and there is no idle period, so it's always scaling and it's always on. So when you need it, it is there at all times. Another thing to note also is the execution time. So the consumption plan basically has a limit of, if I'm not mistaken, 20 minutes. So that means a function will stop running after 20 minutes, right? Whereas a premium plan, it will not have that time limit. So it will run longer than the maximum execution time given to us by the consumption plan, right? So like I said, you have to know what is your context and what you need from it. The dedicated plan will actually give you that app service plan kind of runtime, meaning it will have dedicated resources for your app function, your Azure function app, and you won't have to guess and spell to say, okay, am I overspending, underspending. It will scale automatically and it's far more predictive. So if you know that you're going to need functions and you're going to be doing this long term, you probably want to use the dedicated plan, because then you can actually properly estimate what your costs will be at a certain kind of load. So you can choose the one that you need according to your context. For this course, however, we're going to go ahead with the consumption plan, which is touted as the serverless plan. So next we go over to the networking side, and there isn't much or anything to configure here, because pretty much it is already configured to be public facing to the internet. So we don't really need to do any virtual network um, adjustments here. We can go over to monitoring, where we can turn on application insights, and that allows us to shoot logs and monitor the functions, how they're running, the runtime, any errors that they're getting, all of those. So I would recommend that you enable that. It does cost a little bit of money, but I think that it's worth it in the long run. And then tags, those are good for creating and naming resources, especially in a setting where you may have many resources of very similar natures serving different purposes. So tags can help to um, isolate them and help you with billing and resource allocation in the long run. But we can skip that for now. And then we go to review and create. Once we verify that everything is what we want, we can just hit create. And when that process is completed, you can always just click go to resource. So once on go to resource, if you've ever deployed an app service, it's going to have a very similar dashboard, very similar look and feel. If not, then that's fine. But this is the dashboard that you're getting. So you'll see here that you get some charts, some metrics on runtime, notifications. You can do access control to say which user in your organization or in your Azure AD can do what in this particular resource. We can configure security, set up alerts for any intrusion or potential intrusions. We can set up events. And then, of course, the reason we're here, we can start creating functions. All right, so let's start off by creating an HTTP request triggered function. So we're in the function app, and then we go down to functions, then we click create up top, and then that gives us the list. And from that list, we want the HTTP trigger. So you click that, you give it a function name, and I'm just going to name it HTTP-request-func or function. Let me just write that out. And then here for the authorization level, I kind of skimmed over it last time, but I'm going to go much more slowly this time and explain in more detail. So when we choose the authorization level for function, what's going to happen is that any device, any caller to this function needs to provide a key that is specific to this function. So by creating the function, we get a key, and this key must be present in every request to this function in order for it to actually be triggered. When we say anonymous, it's open. Anybody can access it. There's no need for a key or any additional security constraints. And then when we use admin, it means that the admin who has a master key that would allow that admin to execute any function whatsoever, any function at all, but only at the admin level can it be executed. So I'm going to leave this at the function level for now, and I'm going to hit create. So now that our function has been created, we can go down to the code and test blade. So once we're in this blade, it's going to show us some boilerplate function code. A lot of things are defined for us. You'll notice that the file extension here is .csx. So based on the template that you're using, meaning are you using JavaScript, are you using C#, etc., then that file extension will of course be different. And if you drop that down, you'll see that you also have a readme file .md or for markdown, similar to what you would have on GitHub or Azure DevOps for documentation purposes. And you also have function.json. And this function.json file basically just has configurations for different bindings and different metadata about the function. So here you can see it's specifying that we're using the HTTP trigger, and it's accepting the methods of get and post. So if we wanted to do put and maybe patch and delete, etc., you just extend that whole section there for methods. So there are times when you may need to modify this file, but for now, we don't necessarily need to modify this. So we'll just leave that alone. And let's go back to our run.csx. And what we're going to do here is look through the code. So it's really simple code. We're using a few libraries, and here we're including a third-party library that you would have probably had to get with like NuGet if you're doing a regular .NET application. But we're using some libraries here, and then we have a method that returns an I action result. So if you ever worked with APIs, you'd be familiar, or even a regular MVC app, you'd be familiar with the I action result. Now, the HTTP triggered function is usually very useful for pretending, or not pretending, but for acting like an API. And it's also very useful for responding to webhooks. So anything that is HTTP traffic, the HTTP triggered function, generally speaking, is equipped to handle that kind of operation. And so you could actually build out a full API or full application logic using a suite of HTTP request triggered functions, each one responding to the specific request accordingly. So here inside of our run method, we see that we get a parameter HTTP request, and we're calling it rec. And we're also putting in an instance of our logger. So we're logging information first line. We're just saying this was processed. It was called. We're processing a request. Then we're getting from the request a query string with the name. So we're getting the value from the query string with the name, and we're storing it inside of this variable called name. And then we're saying the request body, process that request body. Please look in that request body. If it's JSON, or stream it to JSON, look inside of it and see if you can find name. So here it is saying that either you're going to find the query string with the name in the query string in the URL itself, or you can look in the request body in case it might have been a post request and look for some data that has the name. Please give me that value. That's all that is doing. So it could have been an either or, because usually you send either a post or a get. But here the code is just showing you that this is how you get a query string value, and this is how you get something from a post request. That's all that's really happening. Then it's going to formulate a response message, and it's going to say if this name variable is not null or empty, or sorry, if it is null or empty, then give an error saying that you need to pass it either in the query string or in the request body. And if it is not null or empty, then we're going to print hello name. This was executed successfully. Then we return OK, which is a 200 result. If you're familiar with HTTP response codes, OK, the OK function gives back a 200 response code as well as that message. All right, that was a tour of the code. Not going to modify it, just going to test it. So let's test and run. And we see here, firstly, it's going to say, okay, in testing, are you doing a post or a get method call? Secondly, what kind of key, right? So I can use the master key. Master, because in the portal, we are the admin. So the master key can do everything anyway, but you could just test it with the function key since that is what we deployed it to use. You can add a parameter here, or you can change the body here. So I'm going to put my name inside of the body, and that is a post request. So when I click run, then I'm going to get the output of a 200 response. Hello, the name that I entered. This was triggered successfully. So that's a good test, right? Now let's jump back over to input and change the parameters. So I'm doing a get request this time, and I'm putting in that query, and I'm calling the variable name. So the parameter is name and the value is still my name. And I'll just say dash get. And I don't know if you're experiencing this, but while using the portal, I have to like press a button and then wait for the character to appear. So that's one of the reasons I don't really like working in the portal directly like this, at least for this kind of operation. It's a little slow for me, but you can let me know if you're experiencing that also. But when I click run, then we get the same result. So this time it was getting it from the query string as opposed to the request body like it did for the post. Now, if I misname this query parameter and then run, then we get our error. This HTTP triggered function executed successfully, but please pass in data as it is expecting. All right. So that is pretty much how the HTTP triggered function works. A request comes in with data, we write code to parse through the data, manipulate it, do whatever we need to do with it, and then maybe we send back or we write a log so that we can actually track the execution path, right? But we also just let them know the kind of response. So I could actually respond and say, if the query parameter was not null, then return a new maybe bad request object results, right? Something like that. So that is pretty much how that works. Now I can actually get the function URL by clicking this button up top, and then it will say, give me the default, well, which link do you want? So it's actually going to include the key on that URL. Do I want the master key or do I want the function key? So I'm going to leave it on default. And if we take a look at that URL, and I'm just going to use Notepad++ here, we see that we have the URL to the function app, and then it says /API, and then the name of the function, and then code is equal to, and then this hashed string, which is that key, that's a function key. So if I needed to execute this from any kind of application that I am writing, then I have to execute it against a URL looking at minimum like this. So without that code, it would never reach the destination. It would just reject the request altogether. Now, if we go through the other pages that are available to us from this screen, we can go to integration, which allows us to edit certain things. So we can edit the trigger, we can edit the function, we can modify the input and the output. So it's a mini flowchart just to say that this is where it's starting, this is the process, and this is what is expected, right? We can go down to the monitor, which basically shows us all of the executions and how many of them were successful, how many of them failed. And then we can go to the function keys, which will show us our keys. We can always click to view the value. So because we're using the function key, that is our function key if you ever need to retrieve it, or if you need to renew it, reset it, etc., whatever you need to do. So that is pretty much it for setting up an HTTP triggered function.